Panama City, Florida, Bay County arrests 5 homeless people and charges them with felony dumping. That's right, a felony. Being homeless in Florida in a homeless camp can now catch you a felony charge. What does this mean? As a legal precedent for the homeless people in Florida, in 2018, Hurricane Michael made landfall in this metropolitan area, and it absolutely destroyed the city. 5 years later, many neighborhoods in Panama City have still not been able to recover, and the homes are now being demolished. It is difficult to find anybody hiring for more than $14 an hour. While New York and Chicago have jobs in finance, California is leading the way in technology jobs. The state of Florida doesn't have any industry except for tourism. Yet instead of trying to create industries in Florida so people can have better incomes and be able to afford housing, the state of Florida is currently fighting wars against the few avenues of tourism. Take, for example, the attacks on Disney World in Orlando. On Panama City Beach, in a 9-day period, there were 7 drownings. Fox News recently published an article telling people it's too dangerous to go to Panama City Beach. The only source of income that people have in this metropolitan area of Florida is tourism, and it's being attacked by many different angles. The Community Redevelopment Agency's former head is now being charged with a nearly $90,000 embezzlement criminal case. These funds that were allocated for the community to recover were actually being used on his own personal real estate endeavors, stealing the resources of the city to recover so that he could rebuild his rental properties so that he could charge exorbitant rents. These officials are not only not devoting their time to help the community recover, they're actually devoting their time to see how they can steal the resources of the community so that they can enrich themselves. The poverty in Panama City is shocking, but even more shocking is how they haven't been able to recover from the hurricane. But how will they be able to recover when local offices are only focused on what they can steal, and the resources that are allocated to the community to recover are being swindled for their own personal gains? According to a local news agency based out of the city, 2 years ago, the homeless shelters were closed. There's definitely a shared responsibility of local government with the homelessness and poverty that is plaguing the city. They're attacking the victims, the homeless population of the city, and charging them with felony charges for living in homeless camps over the rubbles of what remained from the city after the 2018 Category 5 hurricane. We have to understand what these charges mean. Felony dumping is usually a charge attributed to commercial endeavors like demolitions, construction projects, or any other type of commercial endeavor in which the waste is dumped on a public land or somewhere else like private property, and in order to avoid landfill fees. That is mostly where this charge is attributed. An example of felony dumping would be somebody discarding a boat hull in an empty field, or somebody dumping 20 or 30 dump truck tires because the weight is over 500 pounds. It is considered that it's no longer littering, but felony dumping, a much more severe charge. This criminal charge would indicate that somebody is discharging a large volume of garbage to never intend possession of ever again. And it is questionable how this criminal charge would apply to somebody who makes a makeshift camp in a site that they are occupying and in possession of, being that they're not discarding the homeless camp, they're residing in it. Collectively charging every resident of the homeless camp for the whole volume of the homeless camp as if that individual was personally responsible for the entire situation there. It is questionable whether this will actually prevail in the court system and set a very nasty human rights violation precedent in the court systems of Florida on how homeless camps will be handled. Without a doubt, if Bay County is able to prosecute these people for these charges, Many other counties in the state of Florida will follow this precedent and do the same exact thing, meaning that homeless people in Florida will not even be allowed to reside in homeless camps anymore. These homeless camps are in the Florida Panhandle, in North Florida, in Central Florida, in South Florida, and now even in the Florida Keys on protected mangrove islands. Florida's homeless camps are becoming more notorious than those in places like Skid Row in California, where at least the homeless camps are on concrete slabs and there's community organizations to help them get back on their feet. Meanwhile, the homeless camps in Florida are almost certain death traps. A large percentage of the homeless people are registered offenders, many of whom come from other states. The same thing can be said about California, where a massive percentage of the homeless population originated somewhere on the East Coast. While the state of Alabama recently made a law making it illegal to be homeless and arresting the homeless people, the state of Florida is trying to use laws that are already in the books and trying to implement them in ways that have not been implemented before to accomplish the same thing, which is to arrest and imprison people who are simply homeless. Take the state of Mississippi and Alabama, who brag about having the lowest percentage of homeless people in the country. It turns out that a vast majority of their homeless population is not on the streets homeless simply because of the state's very high incarceration rate. Their homeless population resides within the prison system, and it looks like this is also the approach that Florida's going to take, eliminating homelessness off the streets by putting the homeless people in prisons. What many people don't understand about percentage of homeless in the population with places like California, where the homeless people are on the streets, is that the approach that other states are taking is to eliminate homelessness by putting the homeless people in prisons. If you were to look at the percentage of people within the criminal system that are indigent when they get out, you would find out that states like Alabama actually have a higher percentage of indigent homeless people than a place like California. It just turns out that instead of these people being on the street, in terms more simple to understand, states like Mississippi and Alabama that brag about not having a homeless problem simply have people in prison that would otherwise be homeless on the streets. States like California are not taking that approach. In a sense, being poor in the United States can pretty much equate to being a criminal. A finger is being pointed at states like California for having a huge volume of homeless people on the streets. However, people fail to notice that states like Mississippi and Alabama would in fact have a much larger homeless percentage by population if those people simply weren't in jail. While the Bay County website is very inconclusive about how they compile their online information for arrest records, it seems like one of the people they arrested on the homeless camps, a 77-year-old man, had an extensive history of criminal records, which would suggest the approach of simply incarcerating homeless people with charges like littering or trespassing or open containers. These charges are almost endemic criminal charges that you're going to see in the state of Florida that you won't find in other states, which means that the state of Florida has already been implementing charges on individuals who are homeless to ensure that they can take them off the streets and into the criminal system. However, this new charge or this new implementation of an existing law will suggest that law enforcement will simply be able to walk into a homeless camp and arrest everybody there with a felony. So when the local cities and counties offer absolutely no help to people that are homeless, no homeless shelters, absolutely no way to escape homelessness, and then you charge them with charges that are pretty much unavoidable as a result of homelessness, you almost enter a realm of taxation without representation. You can't legally hold somebody accountable for their state of homelessness when the cities and municipalities and state are the ones responsible for the people not being able to make enough money to earn a decent living, to have housing. The case of Panama City is a perfect example where the state, city, county are attacking the industries like tourism with help of media agencies like Fox News, which are known to be their associates, then giving the victims, the homeless people, criminal charges for a situation that they created. There's absolutely no doubt that the liability of this situation rests in a large percentage on the city of Panama City, not on the people that are homeless. It's still to be determined how the court systems are going to handle these criminal charges. For one, dumping would imply that the person is no longer in possession of these items and has no intention to recover them. In other words, to charge a homeless person for living in a homeless camp would be similar as charging somebody on the beach who brings a cooler and a tent and a few other supplies to be on the beach. The person really hasn't given up those things. They're still in possession of them. How can you charge them with dumping when they're still in possession of the thing? It doesn't really seem like there's much of a legal ground here. And with the persons in question being homeless, it's very questionable where they're actually going to get really valid legal representation. This is really an embarrassment for Florida. You cause a problem and then you hit the person with a felony charge for living in a homeless encampment. This really sets a shameful legal precedent for the state of Florida, and it's really nothing short of an embarrassment how it's being handled and how the people of Florida are now being borderline subjected to legal procedures that are questionable, as well as possibly human rights violations, since what other option do these people really have? They're almost like refugees. I mean, the cities are not offering garbage facilities or other services or assistance that would imply the responsibility of the city in this situation. In other words, if the cities were to provide dumpsters, which they do in a lot of other states, they were to provide some type of way for the homeless people to get rid of their garbage, then you could definitely charge them for felony dumping if they were to create a mess. However, that would imply that a legal avenue was provided. You have to provide for people these services before you can charge them with felony dumping. Cities and counties throughout the entire country provide public places for people to dump their garbage, but not existent in the state of Florida is opportunities for people that are homeless to have access to garbage bins so that these landfill situations clandestinely do not pop up in certain places. Because of the no trespassing charges that homeless people are facing when they enter private property, a lot of the homeless camps in Florida are now within city or county properties, which would imply that they cannot be charged with trespassing because it's a public place. If it is a public place, then why don't they have containers for them to dispose of their garbage? They certainly have no problem misplacing $90,000 worth of city materials towards their own personal businesses. How difficult is it to provide garbage cans for the homeless? Reminds me of a commissioner in Naples, Florida, who had a huge garbage pile in front of her house near the beach. I approached her with my services and I said, "Hey, I'm a hauling service. I will charge you to haul away this garbage." She laughed in my face and said, "I'm a city commissioner. I can have the garbage trucks come and take that tomorrow." Sure enough, the next day, there were 2 garbage trucks from Waste Management in front of her private property hauling away materials that were her personal business. They were using city trucks to move it off her property. They can easily allocate public sources for themselves and for their own properties, but then they have a problem doing their job and making sure that the homeless people have a place to at least get rid of their garbage. It's not the adjacent businesses' responsibilities. Collier County, Florida, the same county where the city commissioner did that, I remember we had a community cleanup where code enforcement was able to use the resources of waste management that the county pays for to bring dumpsters to poor communities to help them clean up their properties because it was looking unsightly. It's not impossible for local government to give dumpsters to a particular area if they need it, but then they don't want to do it because it makes them look a certain way in front of their peers. Take my YouTube channel. I don't have a political affiliation. Anytime that I even remotely mention helping people who are in need, I get accused of being a liberal. And that's exactly why many times these local offices are afraid to do anything to help because of how they may be perceived by other people within their own counties. And keep in mind that today, anything that a public official does, whether politically affiliated or not, is going to make them look like they're aligning themselves with a political party based on the actions they do. And many times, things like helping the poor make them look like liberals. So despite the fact it's needed in the community, they refuse to do it because of how they may be perceived in carrying out their civil duties. Unless they're stealing resources for themselves, because that's not really politically affiliated. That's perfectly fine. Of course, everybody's pointing a finger at California and saying, hey, look at their homeless problem. I have no problem jumping on a plane, going to Skid Row and asking every single homeless person there what state they originated from, but there's no need for me to do that. If you've watched The Soft Underbelly, you know that the vast majority of people in Skid Row are originating from places like Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, anywhere along the U.S. East Coast. It's not really a homegrown California problem. It's like California's become a refugee camp for people who in other states are literally being prosecuted for being homeless. And more than prosecuted, they're being persecuted, because if we go look at the state of Florida right now on a recent video series that I did, whether in Miami or Key West, people will openly offer you for sale substances that are not legal within the state of Florida. Lo único que tengo, no mota, no, bro, I'm good, bro. Is that legal in Florida? Maybe on Key West. Y'all have a good night, brother. Y'all appreciate it. Have fun, bro. Yeah. Let them know where we at. Where we at?
Key West, Florida.
Are you guys real? Are you a real island boy?
Island boy.
Not the fake one. The real one.
No, I'm a mountain boy.
Real one. All right, y'all. Have a good night. Y'all have a good night, bro. Even when recording them, they know they're on camera. They're not afraid to offer you these products. Some things never change. I love how in Miami Beach people just, no, Papa, no, tranquilo, Papa. You know I got a camera. Yet, if you watch my video where I walked around the Tenderloin in San Francisco, when the people on the corner that were selling noticed my camera, they fled the corner because they were afraid of being exposed for what they were doing. Dudes are saying I'm recording. Tranquilo, papi, pa YouTube, tranquilo. They're already saying you're recording, so we'll see. However, here in the state of Florida, you can sell your products openly. Walking through the Tenderloin, I had to scream at them, hey, relax, I'm a YouTuber, you don't have to worry, I'm not the law. But in Florida, when people see me recording in public, they want to come up to me and offer me what I have as a way of advertising their spot because they're not afraid of getting busted. These are two uncontrollable factors for me. If I'm in San Francisco or I'm in Miami, how the people that are engaging illicitly in activities there, I can't control their actions. But we saw in San Francisco how they fled when they saw the cameras, and in Miami, how they gravitate towards the camera as an opportunity to advertise their illegal activities, which goes to show that in Florida, it's a free-for-all when it comes to dealing. The drug overdose rate in Florida is 1.4 times higher than California. That's 40% more people dying every single year in Florida from overdoses than in California. Personally, I can't judge somebody who's homeless and living in the woods in Florida, but I know that it's wrong to charge them with a felony for being in a homeless camp. As messed up as the situation is, the city is responsible to a large degree. I mean, you're talking wages, access to mental health care, even health care in general. There's an elderly and infirm population in Florida who ends up in these situations, and it's not their fault. Hey, look, I'm the first person to tell you that I find these homeless camps by looking at the registry of offenders in Florida. That means these people are a bunch of undesirables for the most part, but I'm also not blind to the fact that among those people are elderly and infirm people who ended up homeless. Could be my dad, could be your dad, could be myself, could be anybody who's going through mental health problems, and they end up homeless in a homeless camp, and now we're going to grab that person and throw them in a state prison We're gonna give these people felony charges for being homeless. We're just gonna walk into a homeless camp and arrest everybody there on felony charges? How do you even know to what degree these people participated in the actual dumping? How do you know they didn't move into a homeless camp and there was already a tent abandoned there and it just moved into a tent that was already there? You can't just slap that criminal charge on random people without knowing a lot of circumstantial evidence. Slow to provide these people with services and the mental help they need. Quick to press criminal charges. The poor and working class people of Florida are just simply being devoured. A completely merciless system where poverty itself is a felony. If there's one person in Florida that the vast majority of people just simply like and admire, it's Sheriff of Polk County Grady Judd. After there was a murder in one of these homeless camps, he actually went there to talk to the residents and make sure if they needed access to any type of services they could be obtained. I personally believe that if these homeless people were engaging in felony dumping, the law enforcement officers of Polk County would have noticed this and made arrests. But he and his officers didn't go there to arrest the homeless people. They went there to offer them services. We carefully studied the debris that we saw at this particular homeless camp, and it was very clear that all the clothing articles were being dumped there by organizations. Somebody had also left dump truck tires as well as large volumes of commercial paint. They're using these homeless camps as sites to do dumping. And what we've noticed as well in Lee County, Florida, is that many times people will go to these homeless camps to dump garbage. Anyways, by the time you have homeless camps in your community, you're also going to have people that are going to go there to dump garbage. And it's not solely the responsibility of the homeless people residing there. It's the companies that are doing this to dump their commercial waste like dump truck tires. And it's also the cities that are not providing wages because they're too occupied stealing public resources for their own properties. Poverty and homelessness have always existed, and there's always going to be somebody who ends up on the streets and has nowhere to go. The approach of giving them criminal charges and arresting them is quite possibly one of the worst things we could do, remembering that you may have elderly parents, remembering that you yourself could fall victim to an illness. We're all a car accident or a workplace accident away from being homeless. For those on fixed income, that's no longer enough to provide housing. Living in a homeless camp may be the only option they have so they can use their SSI for medicine and food, because if they spent it on housing, they would literally starve. And this isn't a rare case. I've interviewed people who've told me specifically they get an SSI. If they got an apartment, then they would starve. Over the years, I've seen some embarrassing things happen in the state of Florida, but trying to criminalize people for living in a homeless camp is definitely the most embarrassing thing I've ever seen. Instead of trying to figure out how we can give these people resources to healthcare or even other services like homeless shelters. So when states like Florida, Alabama, and Mississippi are incarcerating people for being homeless, of course they're going to flee to a state like California, where at least they can sleep on a sidewalk and not worry about going to prison for it.